Lucille Clifton's poem Miss Rosie is written in free verse, utilizing the varying rhythms and music of conversational speech to carry each line. Clifton uses a refrain, "When I watch you," three times throughout to perhaps reflect a speaker talking to a person who might not be listening, or in this case, an older woman who might even be hard of hearing. Repeating a line stresses its importance as if saying it only once is not enough. It also creates a musical pattern throughout, in this case, much like a chorus of a blues song. Let's see the summary of the poem. In the first line, Clifton introduces a speaker talking directly to Miss Rosie, placing them in the same scene together. This line also establishes the refrain, which is repeated several times throughout. In lines 2 to 4, the poet begins describing the older woman, using a simile to compare Miss Rosie to garbage and the awful smell of decaying food in order to emphasize her poverty and isolation. She is wrapped up, sitting, and surrounded, all three descriptions helping create a sense of non movement, of being stuck the way she is. The fifth line is a one word line, almost like a hinge or fulcrum. The poet separates the description earlier from those to follow. Lines 6 to 8 continue to describe the woman, this time focusing on her shoes. Not only are they so worn out, the poet can glimpse a little toe, they are also men's shoes. This portrays Miss Rosie as more masculine than feminine in her old age, any romantic appeal long past. It is important to note as well how the repeated vowel sounds you, old, shoe, toe, and out help slow down the rhythm of these lines, reinforcing the sense of stillness and old age. This use of repeated vowel sounds is a type of alliteration, specifically called assonance. In lines 9 and 10, we are reminded again of the woman's stagnancy, motionless, and the poet also introduces a possibility of Rosie's senility. The grocery simile continues the domestic theme throughout. As if Miss Rosie wasn't listening to anything said earlier, the poet takes on an even more forceful voice, repeating herself a third time. This wet brown bag image also suggests the dark color of the woman's skin. Whereas all the descriptions up to this point are in present tense, focusing on the aged woman sitting before her, here the poet introduces the fact that as a younger woman growing up in Georgia, Miss Rosie was quite good looking. This contrasts the present against the past, the beauty of youth against old age, and the effects of a hard life in the South. In a poem packed with so much garbage, worn out shoes, and stale smell, suddenly a rose appears. On a literal level, she was once called the Georgia Rose because of her beauty and probably a pun on her name. Also, the fragrant, bright flower perhaps works as a metaphor for the youth she once possessed. In the last lines 16 to 18, the speaker makes a decision: "I will not let this happen to me," contrasting the repeated descriptions of Miss Rosie as a woman sitting in place, burdened in old age and unable to move or take control of her situation. The poet declares, "I stand up," still young herself, able yet to make a change. It is only after the poet looks long and hard at Miss Rosie's life does she make the declaration, a lesson learned through this other woman's experience, through your destruction, as she says. Ending the poem this way leaves the reader with a sense of hope, and reinforcing this feeling, the three single syllable words repeated in lines 16 and 18 perhaps sound like an enthusiastic first pounded on a table. A person running into Miss Rosie on the street would see a woman with little to be proud of. Clifton uses starkly unflattering images such as garbage, potato peels, and wet brown bag to describe her. We are told that she dresses oddly and that she is waiting for her mind, implying that the things she presently does are done mindlessly. She fits the profile of a mental illness so severe that she is just barely able to function in public and will only be able to sustain herself if next week's groceries arrive. Just when the reader's feelings of pity are almost complete, the poem reveals another side to Miss Rosie her glamorous past. In the present, she is pitied, but back then she was admired so much that, judging from the nickname Georgia Rose, she was a source of pride for her whole community. The poem raises the question regarding which one is the real Miss Rosie. The most obvious answer would be the one spoken of in the present tense, an idea supported by the words "I watch you" being repeated twice, driving home the reality of the woman who lives in filth. But there is nothing admirable about Miss Rosie as described, and it is clear from the final lines of the poem that the speaker admires her. There is no reason to believe that what is being described to be happening is not real. But in the emotions felt for Miss Rosie, the speaker is responding to what reminds of who she once was. And in this way, the poem is redefined in terms of moral reality that is not generally noticed or acknowledged. The first part of the poem gives us reality as we generally experience it through our senses, and even makes that reality particularly grim. But the last 5 lines of the poem allow our ability as humans, with memories and imaginations, to cherish a reality that goes beyond the here and now.